Hi, everybody. This is Andrew Harries, Professor of Practice in Entrepreneurship and Innovation at the Beedie School of Business at SFU. I'm here today with my colleague, Gervase Bushe. I'd like to provide a short introduction to Gervase. He's the Professor of Leadership and Organizational Development at Beedie School of Business at Simon Fraser University. His focus is transforming organizational structures, cultures, and processes away from command and control towards more collaborative work systems. Gervase is an award-winning author of multiple papers and books on organizational change, leadership, teams, and teamwork, and works with leaders who want to create great teams through organizational transformation. He also runs a training and development company, Clear Learning, and has published a book called Clear Leadership, which has been used to train tens of thousands of managers throughout the world in his models and methods. Gervase has a PhD from Case Western Reserve in organizational behavior, and since 2016, HR Magazine in the UK has identified Gervase as one of the 30 most influential HR thinkers. So Gervase, thanks for joining me this evening.
Thank you.
We're going to be talking about a few things pertaining to working through crises to build organizational strength. So maybe the first thing you could do is tell us how you first got interested in studying leadership in a crisis.
Yeah, it started back in my doctoral program when dinosaurs roamed the planet. And the doctoral program I was in at Case in Cleveland, we got a big contract to study the impact of Ronald Reagan's civil service reform in the late 70s, early 80s. And this was, most people won't remember this, but Reagan came in and fired a whole bunch of people in the civil service and just kind of cleared it out. And we went in and took a look at what the impact of that was, and it wasn't pretty. It was really pretty nasty. And the way they went about doing it, destroyed morale, performance went down, productivity went down. People would come to work and not work. They were forming clubs to find jobs for each other, and so on and so forth. And the 1980 recession followed that rapidly, and there was a bunch of studies that took place at that time about what companies were doing, and they were all making virtually the same set of mistakes. And the number one mistake is for a crisis to show up, and the leaders head to the back room and they sit around and they make a bunch of decisions, and then they show up and they say, this is our decision, this is what we're going to do. And the impact of that is that people feel kind of lost. They go into despair. Even the people who are left after layoffs that are done that way go through something we call survivor guilt. And so this creates a really negative impact, usually, especially on where the organization is once you start to come out of the crisis. When I first came to SFU in the early 80s, the CEO of Champion Forest Products came and gave a talk where he claimed that they had come out of the recession with higher morale and higher productivity than they went in. And I thought, I got to see this. And so I went, and he let me interview about 25, 30 people in the company, and I discovered it was true. They had. And the way they'd done that was to do the exact opposite of what most other companies do. First and foremost, instead of the tops going into the back room and making a bunch of decisions, what he did instead was he put out all the information to the whole organization, laid it out. This is what we're facing. These are the kind of cost problems we have. This is what we think is going to be happening. We got some problems here. And then invited the organization to propose to him ways of dealing with it. And a whole bunch of innovative ideas came forward. One of the ones I was most surprised was there was a whole group that said, you don't really need us anymore. You can just let us all go. And that was an IT group that had just completed implementing a large IT system. They really didn't have anything left to do, and they were very specialized, and it was easy for them to find new jobs. So they just said that. And one of the things that companies often do when they face cost pressures is they'll say, well, 20% cuts across the board. And I find that the bigger the company, the more likely they are to do that. Mm-hmm. Well, and typically what happens for the employees who are in the company, they look at that and they go, this is crazy. It's like, that area over there has way too much resources. We should be cutting that 40%. This area over here, we need to be, and people know that.
Everybody knows that.
Everybody knows
that. And Yeah, they'll tell you you can cut that program completely.
But in an attempt to appear fair and, and not really deal with the harder issue of how you look people in the eye and say, you're not going to get, whatever the goodies, and they are, and work through the anxiety of that, they'll just say 20% across the board, which leaves people feeling like, what are our leaders, it doesn't create in general a lot of trust in the competence of their leaders. So, but what happened at Champion was people came up with different things. And one of the things they decided was there was this one area they were getting into some sort of manufactured fiberboard of some sort. This was a new product, and it was actually selling. And that was their growth opportunity. And so they invested in that. They took money from one part of the company, invested in that. But these were ideas coming from the people who worked there, right? So there were layoffs. People understood why there were layoffs. And one of the things we've learned is that, and there's been, hundreds of studies on this since then, is that how you go about managing a crisis, laying people off and that sort of thing, the impact it has on people doesn't have so much to do with what we call distributive justice, which is, do people feel the results are fair? So, like if we cut the pie and everybody gets an equal share, are people going to feel like that was fair? They may feel it was fair, but it has no impact on people's sense of morale or productivity or performance. What counts is something called procedural justice, which is, do people feel the process was fair? The way that you went about making these decisions. And there are some, clear notions about what's important about it. And number one, I would call transparency. And that is, do people understand the criteria that are being used to make the decisions that are being used? Which is one of the reasons why I really advocate, give people all the information, show them, the doom and gloom that's in front of you, and help them understand why you have to make decisions that you're having to make. So transparency around criteria is number one. Number two is that you're seen to apply that criteria consistently across the board, what you could call unbiased, right? The people believe that there are people who are being treated, favorably, or, the worst thing, of course, is that, everybody's getting a pay cut except for the executives, that sort of thing. Like, that just creates cynicism and distrust.
I think it needs to start at the top if you're asking everybody to make a sacrifice.
No kidding. And then the third one that really powers this up, and when you do this, the research is you can even lay people off and they will leave feeling good about you. And everybody who's left will have a good feeling too, is that you could call it, engagement. And that is that people feel like they had a chance to have a say in that criteria. If they put their hand up, if they had an idea, if they had a challenge, that they had an opportunity to take a kick at the can, it got heard, may not have gotten, put into it, but they understand it and they understand why. So if you got those three criteria, transparency, unbiased, and engaged, in the way you go about making decisions, then you're going to come out of your crisis with a much stronger organization. And let's face it, when you're in a crisis, that's when you most need people to bring their best game, to be committed, to show up and be ready to perform. You don't want them sitting around worrying like what's going to happen to them next. And
yes, you don't want your leaders losing their heads.
No,
at this particular moment, you want to know that they're engaged, that they're in touch with what's really going on.
That's right. They trust you.
Fair decisions.
Right. And the fundamental thing here, I think, is the easiest way to create a sense of we is to have an external threat. Right? You can have groups that are at war with each other, but an external threat shows up and boom, they come together. Right? And that's what you have in a crisis. You have the opportunity to utilize an external threat to now build a strong sense of we. But if leaders go into the back room and do all the planning and come out and announce it, instead what they end up creating is an us versus them scenario, right? Where what the employees experience is, well, there's them and they're looking after themselves, and they'll make up all sorts of stories about what's going on in the back room. It doesn't matter what's going on in the back room. Usually, my experience as a consultant, what's going on in the back room is the leaders are sweating out, trying to figure out how to do the best for the company and how to do the best for the people. And, they're up all night, but that's not the story people are making up down in the boiler room, right? The story they're making up is our leaders are out there covering their ass.
You mean in the absence of clear and transparent communication?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So
is there anything different about this crisis as it pertains to how you deal with people compared to prior crises?
Yeah. There are a couple things. One is the level of uncertainty. An economic recession comes along. We have a lot of tools for figuring out where we're going and what's going to happen next. But with this thing, nobody knows what's going to happen next. Is this going to be over in 3 weeks? Is it going to be over in 3 months? Is it going to be over in a year? Are we going to get to a place where it appears everything's fine and then a second wave comes? People are talking about the second wave phenomena. What's the impact going to be? And then is some technological fix going to show up that we're not ready for? What are our customers going to do? I mean, on and on. And I think most fundamentally, the first and most important thing leaders have to do is to acknowledge to themselves and to acknowledge to others is we don't know, right? And so one of the things I've been studying for the last 10 years is how do you lead when you have that much uncertainty and volatility, right? And I think the research shows pretty clearly that the most effective way to lead in that situation is to try stuff and learn as you go, See, and a learn as you go kind of scenario, what you need to do as a leader is say, look, I don't know what's going to happen tomorrow, and I don't know what's going to happen next week, but here's the scenarios, and here's how bad it is. And now I want to invite you in to help us figure out what to do and generate as many good ideas as we can and try as many as we can in those places where we can do that. And I can talk a little bit more. I think there are two kinds of decision situations leaders face. And one of them I would call generative decision situation, where I don't just need one solution. I can use a lot of different solutions. Let's try a bunch and learn as we go. Like question, how do we maintain customer contact in the face of all this remote working? Well, we can try a bunch of different things. Different people have different ideas. Let's try it. Let's see what works. Learn as you go, So that's...
Do you find that some leaders feel, for whatever reason, that they need to appear to be in command all the time and have all of the answers?
Yes.
And why do you think that is, and what impact does that have on their people?
I think there's a bunch of different reasons for that. I think one, it's part of our narrative. Our narrative of leadership is that leaders have a vision and they know. And if they don't have a vision, they're not a leader. And then when people are in crisis and when there's a lot of anxiety, there's a tremendous push from the bottom up as, tell us what to do, have a plan, And at the same time as people are saying that, they're also thinking, you don't really know. So you show up and tell me,
ask us, we'll tell you.
Right? So there's certain kinds of crises, like there's a fire in the theater. It's not a time for participative decision making. You need a guy who goes, the exit's this way, follow me, And when you know where the exit is, that's great. But when you have no clue where the exit is, saying, I know where the exit is, follow me, is just as likely to get people killed as to, So part of the problem is in a generative situation, in an uncertain situation like this, rather than providing vision, what leaders need to provide is purpose. And what a purpose is what we're trying to do every day. And in any kind of crisis situation, the purpose shifts. So our normal business purpose, whatever it is, today, all of a sudden now, so like one organization I'm consulting to right now, their purpose is how do we sustain operations while everybody's working remotely? That's their purpose right now. And they're trying to do that every day. And they're trying to figure out how to do that. And they're engaging their workforce and helping them figure out how to do that. And they're trying different things. And, so that's one thing that's different is how great the uncertainty is. And nobody knows what's going to happen next. The second thing, of course, is that we're all having to stay away from each other. So most of the processes we've developed for what I call generative change, which is this way of working bottom up and learning as you go, involve bringing people together to have conversations. And so now we're all having to move remote. So And the last 2 weeks, I've been sort of connecting to my global network around, what do we know about how to take these generative change processes and do them remotely? And there's a huge conversation taking place. And I've just put together a little booklet that's available for free on one of my websites for consultants. But and it turns out that there's some real opportunities here to do things maybe even better because of the remote tools we have.
Right. What do you say to leaders who think that if their people are at home, they're sloughing off and they're not working?
Well, there's a lot of guidance out there on how to manage remote work effectively. Gallup's been running, sort of webcasts on it recently. You Google, supervising remote work, you'll get a ton of do this, do that, do this, do that, and a lot of it's just good supervision and providing clear agendas and that sort of thing. I think, so part of the problem we're facing now, because we can't be together, because in a crisis, one of the most important things for leaders to do is to show up, be available, walk around, touch people, ask them how they're doing, how's the family, so on and so forth. And with remote platforms like Zoom, so when you have this anxiety and people say, what should we do? And the leader says, well, I don't know what we're going to do exactly. I don't have a vision, but I know what our purpose is. And I can describe the process we're going to use to figure it out. And that's the certainty they have to provide. The process we're going to use to figure it out. And it can be things like every day at 11 o'clock, I'm going to be on Zoom for half an hour talking about the current state. Everybody can dial in. If you want to dial in, ask questions, so there's the certainty about process. We're going to have to make these decisions. These are the way we're going to make them. Here's how you get to be engaged in them. I'm providing that clarity, and that creates enough of a sense of certainty, and somebody's in charge here, and somebody knows what the hell's going on, that you can reduce the anxiety enough to actually, do some work. One of the things I've seen like people do on remote now that I think is really interesting is you get on Zoom and you get your 5 decision makers. And this is another thing I think is real important in building strength in a crisis. You have to make decisions with a team. You can't just have one guy go off and try to figure it all out on his own because he just doesn't have enough information. He doesn't have enough perspective. You need to put together a crisis team that can, offer you the client perspective and the supply chain perspective and the finance perspective. And those people need to believe that they can say what they really think. It's safe to say what I really think, and that we're going to butt heads in here, and we're going to have a lot of different points of view. Maybe we'll come to an agreement as a group. Maybe we won't. That's not so important. At the end of the day, the leader's going to have to make the call. But what's fantastic is if you go onto Zoom and you have those meetings on Zoom, because nobody's coming in anyway, they're doing it online, and you make that available to everybody in your organization so they can watch what's going on in those conversations, and you can have an open chair. We call this a fishbowl process. So you have an open chair. Yes. Anybody can step into the chair. If they got an opinion, they can pull out. You could have hundreds of people on the call, and everybody understands what the hell is going on, why decisions are being made the way they're being made, can get to put their hand up. You couldn't do that without a remote connection,
Very true.
Yeah.
Very true.
Yeah. So
fantastic. So any final thoughts to wrap up about managing through this crisis and turning it into an opportunity to develop your organization?
I think the fundamental thing to keep in mind is, how do I create a sense of we? We have a tremendous opportunity in this crisis. You want to build a strong organization. You ask people to show up and say, look, we got to cut costs 20%. How do you think we ought to do it? People will come up with amazing ideas, or they'll step up and they'll say, look, we'll all take a 20% pay cut. Or they'll say, in fact, we'll all take a layoff so we can get government money, but we'll actually come back to work. Or I remember in the 2008 downturn, I was working with one company. It was a software company, and they, but we brought everybody into a room. What are we going to do? And a quarter of the coders said, you know what? We'll do sales. Now, your typical propeller head, like if you went up to them and said, you got to be a sales guy now, they would whine and complain. I got to talk to people. But people put their hand up and said, we'll go into sales.
They
And,
know the product.
so they hooked up with a sales guy for a couple of weeks until they could do cold calls,
Mm-hmm.
brought in more revenue. But the big impact was 6 months later, when the recession's turning around, we're starting to come out. Now you got a quarter of your coders who now understand the client in a whole new way,
Right.
right? Way more able to, the next release of that product just
So
blew
look for opportunities to even repurpose people temporarily because the
exactly,
long-term benefits of
exactly.
cross-fertilization are great.
That's right. And they'll step up and do that if it's their idea,
Right on.
right? So
Great.
I'd say, how do you create a sense of we right now?
Mm-hmm.
And as opposed to, creating an us versus them, where you end up with the people you most need to feel a part of what you're trying to do, feeling like they have to protect themselves from you.
Superb. Well, Gervase, I'd like to thank you very much for joining me this evening. As we've said before, stay safe out there, everybody, and thanks for watching. Bye-bye.